Hey guys, Adam here with AmericanMuscle.com, and today we're taking a closer look at and installing the BBK oil catch can, otherwise known as an oil separator, available for the passenger side of all 2009 and newer 5.7 liter HEMI equipped Challengers. You should be checking this out if you're looking to pick up a very easy to install part that has a lot of upside and no real downside. This thing here is going to help reduce oil sludge and residue from making its way back into your intake manifold, ultimately your engine, robbing you of some of the power and bogging down your throttle and acceleration. Another thing it does is it actually reduces blow-by, which is essentially crankcase exhaust gases making its way back into the engine, pretty much doing the same thing, bogging down, robbing you of some of that power. Catch can filters that oil through, picks up the vapors and residue that can be left behind, ultimately, keeping it from entering that engine bay. That's all kept into this catch can or oil separator. It's exactly what it sounds like. This option from BBK is a gray anodized aluminum finish, has a knurled texture at the bottom, basically giving you that grip to remove the catch can. It's a 3-ounce capacity, and if you unscrew it, you're gonna see it's got a diamond mesh filter on the inside with what looks like steel wool, essentially filtering out those particles, making sure all of that gets caught up instead of making its way back in. It's also got the mesh aluminum screening right here. Very easy to use, very easy textured. It's of course got your O-ring seals to make sure there are no leaks. Everything stays nice and tight inside of this can. So when it comes time for routine maintenance, you go to change your oil every so often, unscrew this, empty it out, clean it, throw it right back in. It's as simple as that. Again, there's no real downside to this. It's one of those things that can extend the life of your engine by making sure the residue doesn't get gunked up inside of the manifold. And really, it's just a no-brainer. It comes in right around 140 bucks. Install gets 1 out of 3 wrenches on our difficulty meter. Anybody can tackle it in about an hour, probably a little bit less than that, with very simple hand tools. Now there's a big caveat, a disclaimer I want to mention here before we move forward. If your 09 and newer 5.7 came with the factory intake that has this extension silencer on it, this will not bolt up where it needs to bolt up. You'll either need to cut that off and plug it, pick up the alternate factory OEM intake that does not have the silencer, or use an aftermarket cold air intake. For the sake of this video, ours, as you can see, does have the silencer. I'm going to completely remove the factory intake tubing, and because it doesn't fit, I'm not going to reinstall it. I just want to show you guys how this gets installed without that in the way. But that is exactly where this is going to go. Tools used in this install include an impact gun, a ratchet, 8mm deep socket, 16mm deep socket, 17mm deep socket, 16mm wrench, small Allen key set, flathead screwdriver, thread tape. Now, step number 1, we're just going to pop off our engine cover, just lift straight up on the front, disconnect the knobs holding it in, and set it aside. The next step here is to pull our factory PCV hoses out of place. It's just this single one coming off of our manifold. What we're going to do is pull back on the top, pull off on the side. That's really all it takes for the uninstall. So I'm going to set this aside. At this point, because our factory intake has this in the way, the bracket that we need to get to in the stud is actually down here already bolted up. So I'm actually going to completely remove our intake. This you do not have to do if your factory intake does not have this reservoir. What we're going to do is grab an 8mm socket and remove our clamps, pull this out of place. Now because that factory silencer reservoir was bracketed here, we have to get this factory bracket out of place. This is the stud we need. So I'm going to grab our socket and get this off, and then we can start on the install. At this point we have a couple of things to assemble, like our hose fittings. Now if you notice on the inlet and outlet side of our catch can, there's threaded holes. Basically, that's to connect our fittings for our hoses. Now what we're gonna have to do is install these. Basically, they're pre-threaded, you just thread them right in. Now you could just do this, but it does leave it a little susceptible to air leaks and oil leaks. So in order to prevent some of that, I'm gonna put a little bit of thread tape on the edge of the threading here for our hose fittings. Definitely recommend picking this up. Just a little bit does the trick, just enough to wrap around at least once. Will help make sure that this has an absolutely airtight seal. One thing I would definitely recommend picking up. You basically just lay the thread tape over the end and wrap it all the way around. Once you have that done, basically just going to thread this on. It'll help get a nice seal. When you thread it on, you want to make sure you thread it all the way so that the hose fittings are facing up from the BBK logo. Everything's gonna go up forward. We're gonna do the same thing for the other one. Get a little piece of that thread tape off, just wrap it around. All right, you don't want to oversteer, get it nice and tight. Make sure you don't over thread it and cross thread them or strip them out. Just have them installed nice and tight like that, facing forward. We can set our thread tape aside. Now we're going to assemble the bracket on the stud. All right, now we can install the bracket included by BBK onto that factory stud. Now that stud was what was connecting that silencer to the bracket to the block. Now this bracket here from BBK is going to sit just like this and hold it a little bit lower in the engine bay to clear the MAF sensor and to clear your factory intake or your aftermarket intake. So at this point, what we're basically going to do is take the 17mm nylon lock nut and just thread it into place. Now it's only going to go so far, so grab a 17 socket and tighten it down. At this point, grab your already assembled catch can, making sure this bracket is lined up facing forward as well. If it isn't, you can loosen up the bottom catch can itself, rotate the bracket and tighten it back up. We're gonna drop this down, grab the really small, about 2mm screws included in the kit, 2mm Allen screws, and just thread one of them on by hand to get started. Be careful not to drop it into the engine bay. And from here, grab the other one. Do the same thing. Now we can move on to the hoses. All right, at this point, we're gonna take the longer PCV hose included in the kit. We're gonna connect that down to the inlet side of the BBK catch can. This you can essentially just push right onto the hose fitting. It'll lock itself in place with the lips. On the top, you're gonna grab one of the hose clamps provided in the kit, slide that on over the edge. Now, if you need to, grab a flathead and loosen it up to fit. This is gonna tuck right on over the factory location. We can tighten this down with our flathead. Now the next step is to take the shorter hose along with the really small one, and these actually have to get assembled together. So this side's gonna go on the outlet side of the catch can. It's gonna go up to this hose fitting. So we're gonna install that on this end. Just push that all the way down, it'll tighten itself together. On the other end of that fitting is that smaller 5/8 hose. And on the other end of that hose, another one of these clamps. Now this one looks a little tight, so we're gonna loosen it up. Slide that on over the edge. Now first step, we're gonna put this end over our outlet. From here we can go up, rotate that hose fitting to line up with the factory location, and tighten down that clamp. All right, at this point, you would reinstall your either factory or aftermarket cold air intake. Make sure that's seated properly back on the throttle body. If you did remove it, from here, pop on our engine cover. Well guys, that's gonna wrap up my review and install for the BBK oil catch can or oil separator, available for the passenger side of all 2009 and newer 5.7 equipped Challengers without the factory silencer on the intake or with an aftermarket cold air intake. If you wanna pick yours up, you can do so right here at AmericanMuscle.com.